Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Samantha Vergara. I'm with the City of Sunnyvale, and we also have Izzy Roberge from the city. I'm from the City of Milpitas, and Izzy's from the City of Sunnyvale. And today we have a presentation about rainwater harvesting, going over some information about rain barrels and gardens. Again, this presentation is also brought to you by BOSCA, which is the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. Before we get started today, we're going to go over a couple of guidelines for participating in tonight's program. By default, all attendees will be muted, but you will have an opportunity to unmute at the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, we would ask that you use the Q&A feature. We will be stopping to answer questions periodically through the presentation, and then at the end, we will unmute you if you have more detailed questions that you might need to explain in words. And we encourage you to ask any questions that you might have. A question that you might have might be helpful for other attendees in the audience. Great. So just a little background about BOSCA. BOSCA is a special district that represents 26 agencies through the Bay Area. This includes cities, water districts, water companies, and universities. BOSCA provides water for over 1.8 million people and over 40,000 businesses in Alameda, Santa Clara, and San Mateo County. All of these businesses, agencies, and cities purchase water from the San Francisco Regional Water System, and BOSCA's main goal is to provide high quality supply of water at a fair price for its customers. While we've made significant strides to increasing water use efficiency in the past decade, there's still a lot more room for improvement, with outdoor water savings being one of the biggest potential sources. And BOSCA's goal is to increase water conservation through educating the audience about water efficient plants and innovative techniques to conserve water at home. Next slide, please. If you are within a BOSCA supported region, there are lots of different ways for you to save water and money. BOSCA offers a really great rebate program where you can convert your lawns through their Lawn Be Gone program and get up to $4 back for replacing your traditional turf with water efficient plants and materials. They also offer up to $200 in rebates for rain barrels. And they have a smart controller and installation rebate program, so you could get some money back for replacing an old irrigation timer with a weather-based irrigation controller. This is really great for making sure that your sprinklers aren't turning off or turning on during rain. And there's also a rain garden rebate program, so you can get up to $300 for installing a rain garden at your home. If you are a resident in Milpitas, we do offer some rebates through Valley Water. You could get up to $4 per square foot for converting your turf to low water use plants. You can also get up to $400 for installing a gray water system, so using water from your laundry and diverting that to your landscape. And there's also free survey programs such as the WaterWise Outdoor Survey, where a trained irrigation professional will come to your home and assess your irrigation system and provide you with some tips and ideas for saving more water. Next slide, please. And if you're interested in saving water at home, we also have the Water Smart program at Milpitas. This program allows you to get a better idea of how much water you're using by taking data from your smart water meter and putting it into an online portal, so you can see how much water you're using per day, per hour, and you could even get alerts for potential leaks or estimated high water bills. And now I'll hand off to Izzy to explain Sunnyvale's programs.
Thank you, Samantha. The City of Sunnyvale encourages you to participate in rebate programs offered by Valley Water. We offer $2 per square foot of rebates for replacing your lawns and plants that require a lot of water with drought-tolerant plants or perennial hardscapes. We also offer up to $200 in rebates for properties that connect a clothes washer to a gray water irrigation system. In order to qualify for these rebates, please make sure that you apply first. A very common mistake is that residents get super excited about the rebates and start transforming their lawns before making sure that they qualify. Also, sorry, 1 second, I'm going back. Also, are you looking for compost? Free compost and mulch are available for Sunnyvale residents at the Smart Station. Stop by Monday through Sunday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with your own shovel and container. Next slide, please. Thank you. One of our most popular programs is our landscape rebate program. We will give you a rebate for taking out your inefficient lawn and putting in a low water use landscape. San Jose municipal customers qualify for up to $2 per square foot. California native landscapes and waterwise landscapes need 1 to 3 years of water to establish, and then they may not need any water except during the hottest summers or driest winters. This is a great project to start now, while we hope that the next winter is also wet. Also, with the same application, you can apply for efficient irrigation equipment, including inline drip irrigation, small irrigation controllers, and rain sensors, so your system only turns on when your plants need it to. Additional information on waterwise gardening can be found on southbaygreengarden.org, where they also have some landscape designs and templates as well. And it's a great way to get some ideas before you go ahead and apply for those rebates. This here is a snapshot of the Waterwise Gardening website. It provides resources to support residents in water efficient landscape renovations and management. Resources include a gallery of gardens with plants identified, plant selection tool, and even a watering calculator. And if you enjoyed tonight's program, we invite you to check out our upcoming webinar classes. You can view the full list or the full schedule and register at bayareaconservation.org. All right, now I have the pleasure of introducing Chris Corvetti, a rainwater harvesting specialist. Chris moved to California upon completion of 2 years Peace Corps service in Mongolia, where she first experienced water scarcity. As a member of the Watershed Stewards AmeriCorps program, Chris delved into issues surrounding water conservation specific to the Bay Area. Since the end of her AmeriCorps service in 2017, Chris has worked with numerous local nonprofits and municipalities to install rainwater harvesting systems throughout the Bay Area. Chris, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and please take it away.
Thanks, Izzy. It looks like we just got our poll results, so I was gonna maybe take a second and go through those if you guys don't mind. So it looks like we have a lot of beginner level gardeners here tonight, which is awesome. Welcome. And we have some more intermediate and advanced. We're going to be talking a lot more about the harvesting side, the rainwater harvesting side on the barrels and the gardens. So it's really appropriate for all those different levels. I'm not going to tell you to go out and how to weed your garden, so you don't have to worry about learning that again if you are more advanced. We're going to talk more about using rainwater in it. And then we've got people that are starting to consider some native plants in their gardens, but maybe want to learn some more about that. And we are going to send some resources out after this presentation, including a Excel spreadsheet of plants from Bosqua, and they'll even tell you which plants are native and which ones qualify towards the rain garden rebates. So it's a really cool sortable Excel spreadsheet, so you can learn a little bit more about native plants. And I have a few options that I'll include in this presentation. And everybody here has heard of rainwater harvesting, so that is excellent. I hope that was the case since you guys all joined us specifically for that tonight. So I'm hoping we will definitely learn a lot tonight about that. And we have one person who already has a rain barrel. So hopefully you'll learn a little bit more about some options for using that rain barrel or expanding your systems. And everyone else, hopefully we will teach you everything you need to know to get your own barrel. Okay. And I'm very sorry, Izzy and Samantha, there is no one from Sunnyvale or Milpitas on the presentation.
I saw that.
That's
But that's
okay.
okay.
We're
This is
Education
all
for
great.
the entire region.
This is all great information for everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. So the question I get most often is why harvest rainwater? And I've got a lot of answers up here on the screen, you know, all the basic ones. It's going to reduce moisture around your building. It's going to lower your water bill. The unchlorinated rainwater can help you maybe get some healthier plants. But one of the things we really want to focus on is reducing polluted runoff and replenishing our groundwater, improving our quality of creeks. So I want to really look at the more environmental impacts and why that's important. So one of the things to think about there is where our water comes from. A lot of our water in the Bay Area comes from Hetch Hetchy, and that takes 8 days to travel to get to us. And then it gets treated in different ways. And some of it, you know, some of our local water does come from our reservoirs, and this has been a great year for our reservoirs. Everything's filling up, and we're getting snowpack that's going to help fill the water basins in the Sierras. But some years our reservoirs don't look that happy, and we get more water that we have to import. So thinking about where our water comes from and trying to figure out ways to use the water that we do get here in the Bay Area is just a great way to kind of give back to our ecosystem. So we're going to mostly talk about rain barrels and rain gardens today, but there's another type of rainwater harvesting that I'm just going to touch on briefly, and that's permeable pavement. And permeable pavement is just a small solution for allowing more water when it is raining to infiltrate into the ground and help replenish our groundwater. The idea being that so much of our landscape here in the Bay Area is hardscaped, which means the water can't sink down to the ground. We have houses, we have roads, we have driveways, we have walkways, we have so many buildings that the water just has nowhere to go but into our storm drains and into our creeks, carrying all those pollutants. So if we can slow that water down, spread it out, and sink it into the ground, then we can help lower the amount of pollutants that are getting carried by that water into our creeks and help replenish that groundwater. So permeable pavement is a great way to do that. It also helps reduce local flooding. There's two different types, mostly. One is using regular pavers that are hardscape pavers, but with spacing between. And you can see that on both the picture on the left and the right. And the other one is porous cement, which is the picture in the middle. You can see the demonstration of the hose being poured through the porous cement, and it's actually soaking down through the ground. A lot of cities, including Sunnyvale and Milpitas, are starting to use this porous cement for walkways, especially in parks, as well as parking spots and parking lots. But it's not a great solution for the roads because it just can't handle the amount of wear and tear of a lot of moving vehicles on it. So it's more for walkways, as well as parking spots. But these are just great solutions, especially if you're thinking about putting in a new driveway, to consider for your home, so that less of that water floods and runs down into the gutters and just has a way to sink into the ground. So we're going to talk a lot about rain barrels and rain gardens. But before I get into that, since I'm talking about all this water running off and all the pollution that it can carry, everyone always asks me, is there actually that much rain? We don't get a lot of rain, and this year it feels a little weird saying it in a presentation because we've actually had a lot of rain and larger storms, and at least here it rained all day today. My backyard's completely flooded right now. So normally people are shocked by these numbers, but right now you may not be too surprised. So this equation was one that you can use to calculate how much rainwater you can capture from your roof or per downspout on your roof. And in general, you can think of it as 1,000 square foot roof can capture over 600 gallons of rainwater in 1 inch of rain. So let's translate that. There's our equation. And our normal rainstorms, not this year, but in historically normal rainstorm for the Bay Area is about 1/2 inch. So in Milpitas, we get about 16 inches a year. So that's almost 10,000 gallons of rainwater per year on 1,000 square foot roof. And Sunnyvale, it's a little bit less, about 620 gallons less because they get 1 inch less rain per year. It is interesting, the Bay Area, a lot of cities have varying amounts. The highest is Portola Valley in this area, and I believe they get 24 inches a year. But the US national average is 38 inches of precipitation a year. So if you think about it like that, the Bay Area gets about half as much of the US average in rain. So we need to think about how we can use the rain that we do get more wisely and be able to make the most use of it. So we're gonna take a closer look at that.
Chris, I do
So-
have a quick question come in if you have a second.
Absolutely.
All right. So the question is it safe to irrigate edibles with rainwater collected from composition shingle, in parentheses, or asphalt shingle for roofing material?
That is an excellent question since we just got to the roof type slide. So we're
Perfect.
going to talk about that.
Awesome.
So in general, when using rainwater, all of these roof types that I have listed here are okay for rainwater harvesting into a rain barrel or into a rain garden. However, we're going to talk about plants a little later on. As far as edibles go, you're really not going to put any of them in your rain garden. You might have them on the berms or on the surrounding area so their roots can get into the rain garden, but you're not going to put them in the flooding zone. And you're never going to want to use any rainwater for your root vegetables or anything like strawberries that sits on the ground, just because you can end up with a higher level of toxicity from what collects on our roofs versus what just comes in our rain. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that right now. If you take a look at these different roof types, these are the ones that we normally see in the Bay Area. We don't see a lot of metal roofs here. If you have copper or something with lead flashing or galvanized or untreated metal, it is just not appropriate for rainwater harvesting. So you want to, if you do have a metal roof, which is not very common in this Bay Area, but a metal roof is one that you do want to really know what's up there. The most common ones I have seen on larger warehouse buildings is galvanized, and you do not want that because of the way that it rusts and what can end up in your water from the heavy metal that comes off the roof. Anything like the cedar or the wood, untreated wood, cedar, shake shingles can be used for rainwater harvesting, but you want to be a little bit careful and just think about what is on your roof, because if you have cedar shingles, certain plants don't like the oil that's in cedars. So you just need to know what you're planting and what you're watering with it if you have a cedar shake. Other shakes sometimes are treated regularly with an herbicide or an algicide. And if that's the case, you don't want an herbicide or an algicide being pumped into your garden. So you would not use it if it's being treated. If you have asphalt shingles, they are inert and they're fine to use for rainwater harvesting. But if you get a new roof put on, you do not want to run into your rain tank or your garden for the first couple of rainfalls, because a new asphalt shingle roof is going to have loose asphalt pieces on it that's going to flow off, and you don't want that going into your system. So just disconnecting your system, having the rain run somewhere else for the first couple of rainfalls of that new roof, that's fine. A lot of people also just don't capture the first rainfall of the year because the roof is the dirtiest after the long summer with our wildfires and everything else that's getting pumped into the air. So having a way to disconnect your system is always really useful, and we'll take a look at that as we move forward. Ceramic or clay tiles usually are not treated, as well as cement tiles. They're usually not treated, and so they're very safe to use. Solar panels, or more recently, I've been getting a lot of questions about solar shingles, which are very new to me. But they're usually glass on top, and they normally do not have an algicide or an herbicide on them, so they're safe. But you can always check with the manufacturer and just find out if they are treated with anything that's going to come off. Flat roofs are fine. The other roof that obviously you don't want to use, and they're really not common now because you can't replace them anyway, is asbestos tiles. I have not seen any of them in the Bay Area at any of the sites I've gone to, but I did have someone ask me about that, and we all know asbestos isn't good. Don't put it in your barrels and don't try to harvest that water. Any more questions on roof types?
We do have another question, but it's not about roof types. The question is water filtered as it goes through permeable pavers?
So it depends on what you mean by filtered. So it's not filtered in the sense that, you know, I can throw a cup under it and drink it. It's not that type of filtering that would make it safe, but it is filtered in the sense that anything like larger pieces of plastic or rubbish or pollutants that are larger are going to not be able to go through. So you wouldn't end up, you know, your obviously your plastic water bottles or your candy wrappers aren't going to go through it. So it would filter in that sense. But it's not going to be a solution to make the water itself cleaner on a base level.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about rain gardens. So rain gardens can be used to capture, and again, I'm using filter in that same term, like it's not filtering it for you to drink, but it's filtering it so you're not getting pollutants into your storm drains. It can filter runoff from impervious surfaces to recharge local groundwater. And it's a great way to have temporary flooding to allow the water more time to soak in. So we're doing that same concept of slow it, spread it, and sink it. So it's going to reduce flooding on your streets because the garden's going to be able to handle more water. It's going to reduce the sewer overflows or erosion. And they can be really beautiful. You can build them in so you can't even tell it's a rain garden, like this picture from Bull Park on the left. You can't tell that that is an engineered rain garden dug down to about 18 inches and then infilled with various layers to allow for ponding without creating a pond. It just blends in with the landscaping, and that particular one captures rainwater from the adjacent bike path, which used to flood every time it rained, and now it doesn't flood, and it's a little bit safer for kids going to school. So a traditional rain garden has 3 layers, and it's dug out anywhere from 12 to 24 inches deep. And at the bottom, you put in some drainage rock. It's gonna help the water be able to sit there and soak in without having any water at the surface for mosquitoes or anything else to breed in. On top of that, you have bioswale soil, or you can also use your native soil mixed with compost or sand or something to make it a little bit more nutritious for the plants, as well as a little bit better to filtrate through. We have, where I live, at least, I have very clay soil. So mixing in the sand gives it a little bit of a better ability to let the water run through it rather than clumping up in the soil. On top of that, you have larger river rocks to hold that bioswale soil in place and keep everything nice and in place, as well as to allow the water somewhere to create a temporary pond without having a visible physical pond. So when you're thinking about installing a rain garden, you want to choose a site that's more than 10 feet from your home, and all the water needs to fully drain more than 3 feet from your property line. So you can't have the overflow running downhill into your neighbor's property. Although sometimes that may seem like the dream, it's not the way to go. So we want to make sure we're at least 3 feet from the property line, at least 10 feet from our home, so that we're not ponding water right next to our foundation. One of the things you can do to prepare the site is do a drainage test where you dig out a 1 foot by 1 foot hole. So it's 1 foot square by 1 foot deep. And you fill it with a bucket of water and you time how long it takes for that water to absorb into your native soil. And this will help give you an idea of how deeper you need to go, because you're going to have that calculation of how much water is going to be coming out of your downspout from that previous slide. So you're going to know how much area you want to be able to cover with this garden to make sure that all that water can get sunk in or has somewhere else to go on your property. You're gonna figure out a way to run it from the diverter after you get it all dug out, and we're gonna take a look a little bit at the rebate requirements. It's most of what I just said, but a different angle on a garden. You want to make sure that you have those river rocks protecting erosion from your inflow. Ponding depth of 6 to 12 inches, so making sure that where your river rocks are, you have enough depth so that it can really capture that water. And for the rebate, you are required to use native plants. Like I said, we're going to send you a list that's sortable by what is covered under the BOSQUA rebate. The Valley Water rebate uses very similar things, but the BOSQUA resource is a little bit more accessible in my opinion. We've already covered everything else on here. You may want to create a little bit of a berm on the low side or on the sides of your garden. It's a great way to get rid of some of your soil that you excavated. It's also a great way to kind of help that water stay into your swale when you're doing that. And I always recommend putting mulch on the berm just to help that moisture stay in the ground a little bit better. And when you're looking through the plants, you just want to think about plants for the bottom of the swale that are very happy to be flooded with water at a little bit and then dried off during the dry season. For the raised berm, obviously the plants there are going to be able to sink their roots down towards the water, but they're never going to have that flooded effect. And some plants like both. So these are just a couple that I've used in local rain gardens that have been pretty successful. So you can consider these, but you can also check that list that we're going to email to you at the end of the presentation. I'm going to move forward and talk about fruits and vegetables and which ones you can and can't use and how you can use them, unless we have any questions going back to the anatomy of the rain garden.
No questions so far.
Okay, so fruits and vegetables, you can consider using them for the berm, but not in the swale itself. And the vegetables you want to think about are vining vegetable, things that are going to climb up, things that are not sitting on the ground. So, these are just a couple of examples, tomato, beans, peppers, bushy berries like blueberry, blackberry, raspberry that are up off the ground are great. Tall bushy herbs like rosemary, edible trees like citrus are fine. Larger bushing plants like artichoke are fine. Things that are not on the ground. And this is not just talking about for our rain garden. This is also going to apply when we start talking about rain barrels in the next slide. When you're thinking about what plants you want to water with your rain barrel, these are the same rules to think about. You really don't want to use leafy greens like celery or lettuce that have a higher uptake. I've taught this in person for elementary schools, and there's a really cool thing you can do where you put food coloring in a cup of water and then you put a freshly cut celery stick in it and you can watch the color run up the veins of the celery. That's a really good illustration for the uptake on how stuff in the water can move up. It doesn't do that the same way. The roots filter it out for the vining vegetables, but for the leafy greens, and leafy herbs, it's not. It doesn't have that same filtration. I always say avoid root vegetables when you're irrigating with rainwater because they are going to be in the ground getting direct connection with this, and what we want is for the roots to be what's filtering any pollutants out. Strawberries are another really good example because they grow right on the ground, so you really want to avoid that. With any of these plants and even the decorative plants and native plants that we were talking about, you want to be watering at the roots. You don't want to be using a watering can and spraying the leaves and spraying the fruit anyway. You want to be watering at the roots. And I do recommend drip irrigation with rain barrels. It works really well to be a little bit low maintenance, but a lot of people really enjoy going around and hand watering everything. So just, a reminder that we're going to water at the roots, not at the leaf or the plant. And that's going to allow the roots to be our filtration system. So if we have no more questions, I'm going to move on to rain barrels, unless we have any questions on rain gardens.
No questions. Go right ahead.
Okay, so rain barrels, in much the same way as rain gardens, capture roof runoff, but instead of just allowing it to soak into the ground as soon as the rain stops, you can actually store that water for later use, and you can store it for a long time if you have a large system. If you have a smaller system, you'll probably use the water a little bit sooner. It has all those same great benefits that we talked about earlier and can drastically decrease your need for irrigating with municipal water. When you're choosing your system, you want to consider your roof size or harvesting potential, which we already discussed. You want to think about how many downspouts you have and where they're located. And you want to think about, where you want to install the barrels versus where you want to use the water. And you also want to think about where you're going to drain or overflow. Are you going to run your overflow into a swale or a rain garden? Or are you going to run it back into a French drain that you already have installed? Or is there somewhere else you're going to run the overflow? Just like the rain garden, that water needs to stay on your own property. So any overflow needs to be 3 feet from the property line. You want to make sure that we're not draining onto our neighbor's lawn or fence or anything. If you have multiple downspouts on one side of the building, there are ways to connect one system to multiple downspouts, or to just choose the one that is closer to your garden or more realistic. Just thinking about the space that you have and where the barrels will fit. There's a lot of flexibility in how you can install your barrels. But you really want to make sure that you have space, right? We don't want to block walkways. We want to make sure you can get to the barrel if you need to. If it's, wedged in somewhere, you may not be able to do maintenance on it. It looks like I have a question right now.
Yes, and that question is, are succulents and cacti okay for rain gardens?
Excellent question. I wouldn't recommend putting a cactus in a rain garden because of the flooding. You're likely to get root rot. And they're also not going to qualify for the rebate. As far as succulents, I don't know. I've never been asked that question. Actually, I can cheat because I have the Basqua thing here right now, and I think they have a tab on their flower thing for succulent. So let's sort by succulent. So they actually have a way to sort in their spreadsheet by different categories, which makes it really interesting. So when you guys get this, you'll be able to look. So yes, there are native succulents that do qualify for the rain garden. I've never put succulents in a rain garden, so I had not known that. That's a great question.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, so back to barrels. So looking at the basic anatomy of a rain barrel or a rain cistern. So a rain cistern is essentially a very large rain barrel. Anything over 200 gallons in one tank is considered a cistern. And this picture in front of us on this screen is a 265-gallon rain cistern. This one happens to be located at Gamble Gardens in Palo Alto, if you would like to check it out. It drains into a native rain garden. So it overflows into a native rain garden, which is really cool. So you can see our inflow and leaf eater is at the top of the page. Let's see if I can. So I have a laser pointer. Okay, so we've got a inflow here. We got this pipe coming down the top from the building. And then we have a leaf eater. So the leaf eater is not required, but screening is. So you are required to have screening at the inflow. And in this case, it is directly, this installation is directly under wisteria plant. So it drops a lot of petals and a lot of leaves. So the leaf eater makes it much easier to clean because it's a tilted screen. So it is an optional add-on to do a leaf eater, but for certain sites, it's going to make sense to do. Screening is required at both the inflow and the overflow. If you look at the zoomed in part of this overflow picture, you can see the screen there sticking out, and that screening is right at the connection from the overflow pipe to the tank. And there's also a screen right here on this. Screening prevents mosquitoes or other critters from crawling into the tank. I've seen frogs, I've seen squirrels. Things will try to get into the water, especially in our dry season. So having that screening protects your tank from that and prevents the breeding of mosquitoes. On this tank, we also have a depth gauge at the top. This is another optional accessory, not required in any way. It just lets you know the percentage of water you have in the tank. You can also figure that out pretty easily by tapping the side of the tank. Where there's water, it's going to sound like a thunk, and where it's empty, it's going to sound hollow. Next up, we have strapping. So I do use strapping at all the sites where I install barrels, but it is not actually a requirement for the rebate. It's just earthquake reproofing because I install at public locations where there are kids and other things, and they may be near it if there happened to be an earthquake, and we don't want it to be able to fall and injure anyone. So the strapping is just an extra preventative measure. So I highly recommend it, but it is not required on your own home. For the output, you can see we've got valves on the output at the bottom, and in the bottom picture, you can see we have timers for 2 separate drip irrigation systems on this one. And here we have our output is split. So going out to the top, it's actually heading into that rain garden, and going down, it's headed into a hose for manual watering. So a little bit more about the inflow and overflow. As we talked about, they both require screening. With the inflow, there's 2 different ways that you can run the inflow. So you can divert all of the water like we saw in that last picture, and like we have in this picture on top, where all the water is coming down from that downspout and into the tank. Or you can do what's called a partial diversion, where you drill a little hole into the side of your downspout and you put this partial diverter in it. And the way it works is the water flows down the inside of the pipe, and it gets caught in this little area here, and it runs into your rain barrel. And then once your rain barrel is full, the overflow comes back and fills up this whole pipe, and then it fills up this whole area around, and it goes up and down into the middle of the downspout. So you have this one piece diverter that handles both your inflow and your overflow, which is really amazing if you already have a French drain. because in some cities, if you are grandfathered into an old-fashioned French drain that goes directly into a storm drain or off of your property, you can't reconnect to that after you disconnect because that's no longer the way things are plumbed. Now everything is plumbed onto your own property. It's also just a great way to get the water farther away from your house if you already had a downspout in place that did that. For a lot of people, their downspout only gets them about 6 inches away from the building. So you may want to install a separate overflow, which you would install very high up on the barrel, like on this picture on top. I'm just drawing a circle there, but that's where you would put an overflow as high up on the barrel as you can, and then you would run it towards a garden or a swale. Again, it needs to drain on your own property. And like we said, we need the screening. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about using your water and the output. So when you decide how you want the water output to be plumbed, it's all about how you want to use the water. Do you want to use drip irrigation? You can set it up on a timer, or you can set it up so you have to go out and turn the valve every time. Either way, if you're going to use drip irrigation, you need to put a filter in front of it. You can see the filter here. Ooh, I don't know what that did. Okay, let's try the pen again. You can see the filter here in the bottom picture, and it's a little harder to see on the dirt in the top picture. And the way the filter works is it has a fine mesh on the inside, so it screens any dirt, debris, any particulates that get into your tank. It screens them so they don't clog up your drip irrigation. You don't need the filter or the timer if you're going to hose water, either just using gravity or a pump, or if you're going to use watering cans, or if you're going to let the water just run into a dry creek bed, like we saw in that first picture of it going into the garden at Gamble Gardens, where there was just a ball valve to allow the water to run out to empty. Okay, any questions on input or output?
No questions.
Perfect. I will say that one other thing, if you do drip irrigation and you are not running a pump, the requirement is a little bit different. Than you can't plug in directly to your existing irrigation lines. You do need emitters that are rated for low pressure or gravity fed, and it is a little bit different, as well as the filter is made for gravity fed or low pressure systems, because you're not going to have the same amount of pressure that you have coming out of a municipal line. And that sparked a question right there.
Yes, and that question is, what's a dry creek?
A dry creek is like the dry rain garden that we talked about before. I'm gonna go back a couple pictures. So it's this, in this picture of the rain garden, it's wet because it's been fully filled, but the idea is that it would, when it's empty, it's gonna look like a dry creek bed because there's no water ponding in it. And your rain garden's only ever going to pond for about 48 hours. It should be, designed not to be ponding longer than 48 hours. So most of the time it's going to look like a dry creek bed. So you can run your barrel overflow into that. So when I say dry creek bed, what I mean is dry rain garden.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, so cisterns. We briefly discussed cisterns. Over 200 gallon capacity, which means you can store more water. Going to last you a little bit longer into the dry season so that you can use even less municipal water. And when they're full, you'll have higher pressure for your gravity fed systems. You do need to consider that the water weighs 8.3 pounds per gallon. So when you get up to these larger systems, you're looking at 1 to 2 tons of weight when they're full. So you have those numbers on bottom. That's a 500 gallon system on the left with a 5'10" person standing 2 steps up on a ladder. next to it. So it's about a 6 foot tall barrel. And on the right, we have the 265, the same one we looked at earlier from Gamble Garden. And so that's going to have over 2,000 pounds, way over 2,000 pounds when it's filled with water. So these get really heavy. So you really need to think about what you're setting them on. You can't set them on dirt. You need to make sure that they're going to be totally secure and not going to want to fall over, because when the water gets into just dirt, it can move. So creating a base, I often, if I don't have a concrete pad, I often do a wooden framework filled with gravel after getting any organic matter out of my base and tamping it down, just to make sure that that's not going to move. The other type of cistern is a below ground cistern, which is a little bit more complex, requires, you're not going to be installing these for yourself. This is going to require a contractor to install, and it's going to require a permit. So it's a much more complicated system with a pump, but it's a lot of what we already talked about, just underground. I think I got some questions on cisterns.
Yes, the question is, do we have to get a permit for rainwater?
Excellent question. I have an entire slide on that at the end, so hang with me for that one.
Perfect.
But with a below ground cistern, yes, you will need a permit. You will not need a permit for any of the other systems I've shown you so far. One of the ways that you can get that higher system capacity without buying a cistern or installing a cistern is to daisy chain smaller barrels together. On the left, we have two 50-gallon barrels daisy chained together to create a 100-gallon system. And on the right, we have 4 55-gallon barrels together to create a 220-gallon system. So this is creating a larger capacity system without having to take the space for a cistern. You'll notice that these are both set up on concrete, and with the 4 barrels, we actually added pavers on top to raise them up even a little bit more. This is a really cool way that you can bridge the gap from your downspout to your garden too. So if the downspout's on the wrong side of a wall, like on the wrong end of the building from your garden, you can line your building with a row of barrels to get even greater capacity and bridge the gap to your garden. You can also see that I've gotten that Hoover Park picture on the right that I'm actually collecting from 2 separate downspouts, and they're running to the middle. So you can see the one downspout here, the other one is off screen, and the water is coming in here. So we're actually collecting from 2 separate downspouts. The water comes down into, this is called a first flush diverter, which helps capture the fine sediment for when the first rain starts to come in, and then it has a little ball valve in there that floats up and seals that off. And then the water comes into our system here. And because water seeks its own level, once it gets to this height, it will run across these lines, and then all of the tanks from that point will fill simultaneously. With other systems, you can also daisy chain them underneath or daisy chain them at the overflow, depending on how you want your system to run. So it's possible for most types of barrels, even those 265-gallon slimline tanks that we looked at in the Gamble Garden picture, or this picture right here on the right. I've daisy chained those together to put multiple of them together behind a building up at one of the mid-pen open spaces. Wine barrel conversion is a question I get a lot, and I'm actually going to give you a little step-by-step guide in the email following the presentation to walk you through how to do this on your own. The downside is wine barrel conversion is not covered by the rebates, but it is a great rustic look, and a lot of people like it because we have such a history of wineries in this area, and there are a lot that you can check to buy the barrels locally. They're usually 50 to 65 gallons, so you can get a decent capacity. The one on the left is daisy chaining 2 together. The one on the right is just a single barrel. So you have options there. You can also recycle food grade barrels. So if you don't want to purchase a rain barrel kit, you can do food grade barrels. The picture in the middle and on the left are recycled oil barrels. And on the right, these are recycled FDA approved blue barrels. For blue barrels and oil barrels, anything that is FDA approved to bring food in it, we do have this requirement where once it's been used once for food, it can no longer be used again for food grade items, to prevent any cross-contamination or anything growing in it. So this is a great way to give those barrels a second life. Blue barrels can be purchased through Blue Barrel Systems, which is a local Santa Rosa organization. They've designed their own system to underplumb the barrels, which means all of the plumbing, you can barely see it in this photo, but it's all underneath the tanks, which means you get a little bit more water out of the tank. There's less left in it. These ones in the left picture, you can see they're all plumbed in front. So they sit directly on their stand, whereas the blue barrels sit on concrete blocks to raise them up off the ground. Okay, so again, those are all usually 55 gallons per barrel. Sometimes you'll find 65 gallons for the oil ones. You can also get basic rain barrel kits online. And I'm very sorry, I just found out this week that Raindrop Box on the left is no longer available. It was designed by a local student as her senior high school project, and I believe she's graduating from college this year. So it was a few years ago that they designed it, and they are no longer available. They finally sold out, but you can get other ones online or at your local hardware store. The next question I get often is about maintenance. And, you know, what does it take to maintain these barrels? Is it difficult? You know, my regular irrigation is pretty easy. I haven't touched it in years. So barrels are actually very low maintenance. It is a requirement that you clean your gutters twice a year. You really should be doing that anyway. But it's a requirement that you clean your gutters twice a year, check your screens to make sure there's no holes in them and they're still functioning every 3 months or 4 times a year. Clean and empty your first flush diverter twice a year. Visually inspect all valves and components once a year. I know that kind of sounds weird because it's kind of big talk, but that's straight out of the California Plumbing Code. And what it means is that you looked at it and they were all there and they all appeared to be functioning properly. Don't even have to touch your barrel for that one, but you should be touching your barrel more than once a year anyway to check on stuff. Drain and use the system every 5 years or so. You know, you can flush some clean water through it or rinse it out, but you really want to be using your harvested water as much as possible. So ideally, if you're draining it out after every storm or before the next storm to get that water sunk into the ground and give your plants a drink, and then let it refill. You know, your system, if it's sized properly, will fill every storm. And, you know, if you time it right, your last storm will last you into the summer, but you can give the ground a little bit extra in the winter just to soak more water in. So now we're going to get into the permitting, which was our big question earlier. So do I need a permit? And most of these systems that we looked at, the answer is no. So if you're plumbed fully exterior to a single family home and you're under 360 gallons, you're all set. So all those systems, except that 500 gallon tank we looked at, those are all great. Now that 500 gallon tank falls into that or category because it is plumbed with drip irrigation. So if it is under 5,000 gallons, but more than 360 gallons, it has to be drip irrigated. No watering with a hose, no watering with a water can, strictly ground level drip irrigation right at the roots of your plants. It also cannot be connected to electrical and cannot be connected to a makeup water supply in that case. So as soon as you want to connect to electrical, so you want to have a pump that's set up to run automatically whenever it needs, or if you want to set up to a makeup water supply to refill your tank, those are things that require permits. And this makes sense because the state of California doesn't want someone who is not a qualified plumber to go trying to connect up to municipal water with this water and possibly cause a contamination in the municipal water supply. So these systems are run totally separately. If you decide you want to do drip irrigation, but you already have municipal drip irrigation, the easiest solution is to run a second set of drip irrigation lines and use your rain barrel for as long as you have water. And when you run out, go back to your municipal water supply and use those pre-existing water lines to run your drip irrigation. So it is actually much easier and does not require permit to run a new set of irrigation lines over top of the old and run them in tangent with each other than it is to try to connect and use the old system. If you do not meet any of those above exemptions, if it is a below ground system, or if you're connecting to interior plumbing, it needs a permit. So most people are not going to install a 5,000 gallon tank on their own, or enough blue barrels lined up in a row to make 5,000 gallons on their own. That's just not a DIY system generally. So a lot of the you can think of is if you need a contractor, you're probably going to need a permit. If you're going to do one of these smaller systems that we discussed here, keeping it smaller, using drip irrigation, you're going to be okay. The other thing that is required on all systems is to put a sign like on the right hand side of this picture that says caution, non-potable water, do not drink. Most kits that you can get, most diverter kits that you buy online will come with that sticker, and you put it at the output of your barrels. Very simple. So we do want to make sure that all of the barrels are marked so no one thinks that it is a filtered system. Okay, well, I think we got a question popped up before I move on.
Yes, and that is, do people connect to interior plumbing for putting out gray water or bringing rainwater in for some reason?
So yeah, one of the things that you can use rainwater for, in fact, there's some stores at Stanford Shopping Center in Palo Alto that do this, is to use rainwater for flushing toilets. And it is a great use if you have a large enough system to use your rainwater. Most people in this area find that they can't even get through the whole dry season with the amount of rainwater they have. So connecting it in for plumbing may not make sense just because they have enough of landscaping that they want to use it out there. But it is a great option if you're going to install a huge system, or if you're going to install a below ground system that can really hold a lot of water. You can get a permit and connect it in to be able to flush your toilets with rainwater. The reason people would connect interior water to bring it out to a rain barrel would be clean municipal water as a makeup water supply, which again requires a permit. So those are the only two times that you'd be connecting to, interior plumbing or municipal water generally. And both of those do require a permit. With the makeup water supply, what I mean by that is, if you're actually plumbing to have something connect, if you want to take your hose and hold it 6 inches above your barrel and refill your barrel in the dry season so that your drip irrigation will run, even though you've run out of water because it's, September and we're not expecting rain for another couple months, you can do that. I am not saying you can't take your hose and hold it significantly above your barrel. What you cannot do is put your hose fully in the barrel and then fill it up, because then there's a chance of contaminants running into the hose. Really not much of an issue, but they do want an air gap. So they want it to be, outside of the water in the barrel at all times. Okay, well, we talked a lot already about how to use your water. The one thing that I feel like I can't stress enough, and you probably are sick of hearing me say it, but use your water regularly. Empty it between storms. Get that to sink the water into the ground because we want to slow it, spread it, and sink it. You know, if you want to connect it to a pump or just do gravity to water stuff, that's fine, but you can use it to fill a bird bath or a landscape pond such as a rain garden that is going to drain. If you have less than if you have a smaller system and you're using it regularly. You can use it for washing tools or washing your car. It's great. If you're going to use it for washing your car or something that has a more delicate paint, you know, maybe put a filter on it just so that you're not getting any dirt in there. But for washing tools, I use it to wash all my gardening tools, and it's awesome. Just we already talked about connecting it to toilets for flushing, but you need the permit. But yeah, just getting it sunk into the ground for groundwater storage is really great, and you really can go far watering your landscape, especially if you have a native landscape. As they mentioned in the beginning, you know, a native landscape really takes 2 to 3 seasons to mature, and then after that, it takes very little water to maintain. So it's a great investment. Here are some of the digital handouts that we're going to be emailing you. Little garden checklist. We're going to be emailing you some stuff about checklist for applying for the rain garden rebate, the lawn be gone rebate, as well as that plant list I talked about, and then a quick reference guide for the rain barrels, as well as the conversion handout. And we're gonna take some time now for questions and see if anything else comes up, and I can always go back to a previous slide if there's something you wanted to look at again.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. We did have a question come in about should we wash our cars in our driveways? I'm happy to answer this one unless you want to answer that.
I can field that one if you'd like, but the big answer is no, really no. I do know that sometimes people will rinse their cars off to use a rainwater system to do it. They'll actually drive onto their landscaping. They have it set up so they can drive, so all the water goes into their landscaping. But in a lot of the local cities, it's actually illegal to wash your car with soap in your driveway. I don't know specifically Sunnyvale or Milpitas, but a lot of the local car washes recycle their water and are super efficient with their water usages, which is really cool. So you don't have to feel bad about going to a car wash because they are managing that water really well. Izzy, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, same thing. Please do not wash your car in your driveway. Take your car to a car wash because they will recycle the water. So it's even better for the environment because they're going to use that water again. If you're not able to take your car to a car wash, then I recommend putting your car on grass. That way, at least the soap will run off and get filtered through the grass and through the soil. So that's probably best options, car wash. Second best is putting your car on your lawn or somewhere else. And yeah.
All right, we have another question in the Q&A. Someone is asking if you can go back to the water use slide. Great. And if you have any other questions, you guys can type them into the Q&A. And during this portion, you could also raise your hand if you'd like to be unmuted to ask a question that way.
Yeah, we understand some questions are hard to type in. So if you want to speak your question, feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute you.
Cool. And as Chris was saying, we will be sending out a follow-up email once the meeting is over with some more resources if you'd like to do some more research on your own. Yeah. There's another question. What was the phrase? Slow sink something.
Slow it,
wrote it
spread
down.
it. I'm typing it as well. Slow it,
Cool.
spread it, sink it. And the idea is when it rains, water, our ground can't soak everything up, especially if you think about in the fall when the ground is really parched and we get that first rain, it almost shocks the ground and it can't absorb it at all. And we get a lot of dirt that runs off. And then if you think about now in the spring, when we've had a lot of water, the ground's super saturated and it can't handle the water. And we get these mudslides that we're seeing all over the place. And we also get just a lot of water running down the sides of the streets and clogging up our storm drains. So the idea is to slow that water down, to spread it out, and to give it a chance to sink into the ground. And so rain barrels are like the epitome of like the perfect way to slow it down, because you are actually stopping that water and holding it in a barrel. So you're slowing it so much that it can't move. But a rain garden also slows it down and holds it in this temporary ponding area. And then they both allow you to spread that water out and use it in your garden and sink it into the ground. So yeah, slow it, spread it, sink it.
Great, thank you. There's another question in the Q&A. Are there any programs for rainwater harvesting in Redwood City?
There are rebates available for Redwood City through BOSQA, as well as San Mateo County Pollution Prevention Program, known as Flows to Bay. I believe we're sending links for both of those in the follow-up email. But you can also go on the Flows to Bay website. They have a pretty extensive list of the rebates available.
I just did a quick Google search for Redwood City rebates, and you can earn up to $100 per rain barrel purchase installation.
And with the rain barrels, you do not need to apply for the rebates in advance, but with the rain gardens, you do need to apply in advance. So make sure you do the research before you go out and purchase anything, so that you know what you need to do before you apply for that rebate.
Okay, awesome. And another question, do you have any recommendations for apartment dwellers?
If you're in an apartment, there are, reach out to your landlord. Don't install a system that's permanent or that you need to cut into the downspout without talking to your landlord. You can do that partial diverter that we looked at. That was, let's go back a few. I know of people on upper stories who have used the partial diverter, like this bottom one. They got permission from their landlord and they put a 50-gallon tank on their balcony to water their little planters. That being said, it requires cutting into the downspout. So talk to your landlord and make sure everyone's okay with that, or your complex owner. The other thing is there are programs for industrial sites to do larger systems, and you can talk to your land property management and see if they're interested in applying to do a larger system. It does require a permit, but especially if they're re-landscaping, it's a great option to run a rain barrel system for the whole program. The other option, if you're on the ground floor, there are ways to connect to the bottom of a downspout. It's called a wet system, where you can put a drain in the bottom but run the water up into the top of your rain barrel without cutting into the pipe. And you can research a wet system a little bit more, but again, you really want to talk to your landlord and your owner. And most apartments do not qualify for the rebate. Or if they do, I think maybe they need a letter. I'm not sure exactly.
If anyone else has any other questions, definitely feel free to raise your hand now or type them into the chat really quick. If not, I would like to think, oh, there's a question. There we go. Do plants on balconies make a difference?
They might make a huge difference to your quality of life. Flowers make me happy.
Cool.
I'm not sure where that question was going. It's not going to make a huge difference in the oxygen levels in the air. You really want trees for that. As far as the infiltrating the water into the ground, putting water in a planter is not going to help with groundwater recharge because it's not actually going into the groundwater. But yeah, planters on your balcony can definitely increase your quality of life because they'll make you smile.
Cool.
See, it just made Samantha and Izzy smile.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Wait a couple more minutes. And again, we will be sending out more resources, and you can always maybe reach out to Izzy and I in response to that follow-up email we send with any questions that you might have, and we can try our best to get you an answer if it's not addressed in the resources. Cool.
And one other resource for apartment dwellers is most of the cities around here do have community gardens that you can apply to get a plot in. And some of the community gardens managers would be interested if you reached out to them and said, there's a greenhouse or there's, a tool shed. Can we hook up a rainwatering system to that tool shed? They may be open to something like that. I have a 4-foot by 8-foot shed in my backyard, and it fills every time it rains. It fills my 55 gallon barrel. So even a really small shed, if you're putting in a blue barrel or a recycled olive oil barrel, they fill very quickly, even from a small watershed.
All right. Okay, if there aren't any more questions, I'd like to thank you all for joining us and staying this long. Again, we will send out a message to you guys with some more resources so you can learn a little bit more about rainwater harvesting. And if you have any questions, definitely feel free to send a message to Izzy and I, and we will try our best to help you out. If you'd like to view this webinar again, it is recorded and it will be available on Bosca's website as well as their YouTube channel. It should be posted up in a couple of days. And up on this slide, you can see some of our upcoming webinars. We have a couple coming up. We have one this Saturday, and then we have another one next Tuesday, which is again hosted by me in Milpitas about landscape conversion. And then we have a few more through the rest of the spring. And we do also offer webinars in the fall as well. So thank you all for joining and have a good night. Thank you. Okay.